Another day, another scan. They say Mars is the future. For me, it's just another rock. Like Ceres, like Vesta, like all the others I've cracked open, looking for the glint of something valuable. I adjusted the ultrasonic sensor array on my rover, the servos articulating with a quiet whir. The array, a delicate lattice of articulated piezoelectric transducers, extended outwards, mapping the subsurface topology with high-frequency sound waves. I watched the data stream across my heads-up display, a detailed cross-section of Martian regolith. Nothing but basalt and iron oxide for kilometers, just the way the corporate geologists back on Earth like it. Predictable, stable, boring. It's been 5 years since the Callisto incident. 5 years since I lost Ben and John. We were stationed on Callisto, one of Jupiter's moons. Not quite a planet, not quite an asteroid. It had enough gravity to hold a thin atmosphere, but not enough to keep you from feeling like you were walking on a trampoline. I remember the groaning of the mining facility, a sound that seemed to violate the natural order, even on that desolate, frozen rock. We had miscalculated, drilled too deep, too fast, eager for the payout. The whole operation was rushed, just like this one. The facility was a network of interconnected modules, anchored deep into Callisto's icy crust. We weren't just mining for minerals. We were also extracting water ice for fuel and life support. The tremors started subtly, vibrations that you'd feel in your bones. We ignored them, chalked them up to routine ice shifts. Then one of the main drilling sites, weakened by our overzealous extraction, suffered a catastrophic collapse. It wasn't a cave-in, not in the traditional sense. It was more like the ground beneath us simply gave way. The structural supports of our section of the facility, designed to withstand the low gravity and icy conditions, buckled under the unexpected strain. Ben's face, caught in the emergency lights, was twisted in a silent scream as a massive support beam, hundreds of kilos of hardened steel designed to hold the ceiling in place in the low-gravity environment, snapped from its moorings, not falling, but being ejected upwards by the force of the collapsing ice below. It was like watching something in slow motion, that massive beam twisting and turning as it floated upwards in the low gravity. I can still picture it, bending and warping before it tore through the ceiling, causing a catastrophic decompression. John's screams, sharp bursts of terror, were cut short by the explosive decompression and the freezing vacuum that rushed in to fill the void. His suit's integrity was compromised. He never stood a chance. Back in the 60s, it was about the moon, about national pride. Now it's about the bottom line. Helium-3, platinum group metals, water ice. Whatever the corporations like Omnicorp can strip mine and ship back to Earth. We're just glorified miners, light years from home. They call it expanding humanity's reach. I call it indentured servitude with a view. We're all chasing something out here, but most of us don't even know what it is. A new beginning, redemption, or just a bigger paycheck. The colony, Mariner Outpost, wasn't much to look at. A cluster of prefabricated modules, interconnected by pressurized tunnels, huddled against the base of a massive cliff face in the Valles Marineris. Home to 50 souls, give or take a few, depending on the rotation schedule. We were all employees of Omnicorp, the mega corporation that held the primary resource extraction contract for this sector of Mars. Life was regimented, monotonous, and punctuated by the occasional emergency drill that did little to alleviate the underlying tension of living on a barely habitable rock millions of kilometers from Earth. My scanner picked up something strange, a subsurface anomaly, a metallic signature. It didn't match any known human tech. Could have been a natural formation, but the regularity, it was almost artificial. It was a deviation from the surrounding geological strata, a pocket of high density that stood out against the uniform basalt. The sensor readings indicated a regular geometric shape, possibly hollow. My pulse quickened, a sensation I hadn't felt in years. This was something new, something unexpected. I brought the rover to a halt, the sudden silence amplifying the ringing in my ears. I switched off the main drive and activated the auxiliary systems. diverting power to the ground-penetrating radar. "Joseph, Robert, you getting this?" I asked, keying my comm unit. "Subsurface anomaly bearing 27 Mark 14. Looks structured." "Copy that, Clay," Joseph's calm voice responded. "Run a spectral analysis, could be a metallic deposit." Robert's gruff reply followed, "On my way, Clay. Keep your helmet on." I initiated a more detailed scan, focusing the radar on the anomaly. The data began to paint a clearer picture, resolving into a three-dimensional model on my display. It wasn't a natural formation. The object was clearly artificial, a structure of some kind buried beneath centuries of accumulated regolith. It was roughly cuboid with sharp, defined edges. The discovery sent a tremor of excitement through me, quickly followed by a wave of apprehension. I marked the location and transmitted the data to the Mariner Outpost database. Then, following protocol, I set up a perimeter, deploying a series of sensor drones to monitor the area. "Definitely not natural," I reported. "Looks like we've got ourselves a buried structure. Size and composition unknown, but it's big and it's definitely not ours." The next hour crawled by at an agonizing pace as I waited for Robert and Joseph. While I waited, I ran simulations, cross-referencing the anomaly's signature with known materials. Nothing matched. The structure's density and electromagnetic properties were unlike anything in the database. Finally, 2 additional blips appeared on my radar, moving toward my location at a steady clip. Robert and Joseph arrived in a second rover, kicking up a cloud of red dust as they pulled to a stop beside me. Robert was already scanning the area with his own device. Joseph, on the other hand, was practically bouncing in his seat, his eyes glued to his datapad. "Incredible," he breathed. "This could be it, Clay. First contact." "Let's not jump to conclusions," Robert said. "Could be an old probe, a lost satellite, anything." He was always the cautious one, a trait that had saved our necks more than once back in the belt. "Could be," I agreed, "but it's worth a closer look." We set up a temporary floodlight. The entrance, revealed by a carefully controlled seismic charge, was an aperture in the rock face, almost perfectly square, sealed by a door of the same dark metallic material as the structure itself. We spent the next hour meticulously documenting the entrance, taking high-resolution images and analyzing the surrounding area. Dr. Wright, our resident xenolinguistics expert and head of research, joined us, his excitement clearly visible even through his bulky EVA suit. He was practically vibrating with anticipation, his gloved hands tracing the symbols on the door. "This is it," he declared, his voice thick with awe. "This is what we've been waiting for. Proof that we're not alone." He was always prone to hyperbole, but this time, even I felt a surge of something akin to his enthusiasm. We stepped inside, our boots leaving tracks on the layer of fine red dust that had seeped in over what must have been millennia. The walls were covered in carvings, a complex design of lines and curves, something I had never seen before. This wasn't just a cave, it was a structure built by intelligent hands, or whatever they used. The air inside was stale, but breathable, a fact that surprised us all. Joseph ran an atmospheric analysis, confirming the presence of nitrogen, oxygen, and trace amounts of other gases, remarkably similar to the Martian atmosphere, but with a slightly higher oxygen content. "Incredible," he murmured. "They must have had a self-sustaining ecosystem in here." Further in, we found a chamber dominated by a transparent quartz-like structure in the center. Inside, suspended in a viscous, amber-hued fluid, was a figure. This was the source of the anomaly, the heart of the structure, the stasis chamber. The figure within was humanoid, though its proportions were subtly different from ours. It was slender, almost fragile in appearance, with skin that had a smooth, almost porcelain quality, reflecting the ambient light with a subtle, internal luminescence. It was clad in a close-fitting suit of an unknown, flexible material that conformed perfectly to its form, like a second skin. "It's beautiful," Joseph whispered, his voice filled with reverence. I had to agree. Even Robert seemed impressed. his usual cynicism momentarily forgotten. Dr. Wright, never one for sentimentality, was already circling the chamber, his datapad in hand, recording every detail. "The energy readings are extraordinary," he reported. "The chamber is emitting a low-frequency hum, barely perceptible but incredibly complex. It's some kind of advanced stasis field, far beyond anything we've ever encountered." The excitement in his voice was contagious. This was a discovery that would rewrite history books, a paradigm shift in our understanding of the universe. I too felt a sense of awe, mixed with a healthy dose of trepidation. A heated yet hushed debate ensued. "We should report this to Earth, get a full science team out here," I argued, trying to inject some caution into the proceedings. But Wright was adamant. "This is the discovery of a lifetime, Foster. We can't wait months for Earth to weigh in. Think of what we can learn." His argument, fueled by ambition and the allure of the unknown, carried weight. Joseph, usually the voice of reason, sided with Wright, his scientific curiosity overcoming his usual caution. Outvoted and against my better judgment, I watched as Wright, with Joseph's assistance, began the process of activating the chamber's control interface. A series of intricate, touch-sensitive panels lit up with an ethereal glow. The amber-hued fluid within began to circulate, swirling around the suspended figure. The stasis chamber deactivated with a soft whoosh, the fluid receding, leaving the figure standing on a raised platform in the center of the chamber. For a moment, it remained motionless, its large eyes closed. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, it opened its eyes. They were a deep, luminous black, devoid of any discernible pupils. It took a step forward, its movements fluid and graceful. And then it did something none of us expected. It convulsed, its body arching backward as a fine, reddish mist erupted from its pores. The mist, carried on the still air of the chamber, began to expand, forming a cloud of microscopic particles. We watched, mesmerized, as the cloud slowly filled the chamber, swirling around the alien figure. It was then that Wright noticed something on the external sensors of his suit, mounted on his arm. He brought it closer to his faceplate, squinting. "What is it?" I asked. Wright's voice was strained, coming over the comms. "Residue. The sensors. They're detecting microscopic organic compounds, accumulating on the exterior of the suit." "It can't be." His voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. The spores weren't just floating in the air, they were adhering to our suits. Back in the habitat, we went through the standard decontamination procedures, but they felt perfunctory, almost ritualistic. The airlock cycled through its cleansing sequence, jets of a powerful sterilizing solution, spraying our suits from multiple nozzles. The solution, a mixture of peracetic acid and hydrogen peroxide, was designed to eliminate any known organic contaminants. It ran off our suits in rivulets, pooling on the floor before draining away into a collection system. The UV lights came on, casting a blue glow over everything, further enhancing the clinical atmosphere. But a sense of unease lingered, a feeling that something had slipped through the cracks. It had to be our imagination, our exhaustion. I told myself that repeatedly, as if sheer repetition could make it true. Once inside, we doffed our suits in the antechamber, following protocol. Each suit was sealed in a designated disposal bag, marked for later analysis. Underneath, I was wearing the standard-issue thermal undergarments, designed to wick away moisture and regulate body temperature, damp with sweat that had nothing to do with physical exertion, and everything to do with a deeper chill that had settled into my bones. As I peeled off the undergarment, I noticed a fine layer of red dust clinging to the fabric. I brushed it off, a simple, almost automatic action, not wanting to acknowledge the knot of dread forming in my stomach. It had to be Martian dust. It was everywhere after all. "You all right, Clay?" Robert's voice, gruff but concerned, broke through my troubled thoughts. He was already out of his suit. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just peachy," I replied, forcing a casual tone I didn't feel. "Let's get these samples to the lab." Wright's probably itching to start poking around. I tried to inject some levity into my voice, but it sounded hollow, even to my own ears. We delivered the samples to the lab, where Wright and Joseph immediately began their analysis. The rest of us tried to return to our routines, but it was impossible to shake off the feeling that something had fundamentally changed. I went through the motions of my duties, reviewing geological surveys, analyzing data and coordinating with the mining teams, but my mind kept drifting back to the tomb, to the alien figure, to the reddish mist. The first sign that something was wrong came during the next sleep cycle. I was tossing and turning, plagued by restless dreams, vivid, terrifying nightmares that felt more real than any I had ever experienced. It was the Callisto incident all over again, but this time it was different, more intense. I saw Ben and John, their faces contorted in agony, not in the dark as before, but bathed in the red dust that swirled around them, their forms shifting, melting, reforming into something monstrous. Their eyes, once familiar and full of life, were now black, empty and accusing. They reached for me, their hands transforming into grotesque claws, elongated and sharpened. I woke up in a cold sweat, the sheets tangled around my legs. The metallic tang of blood filled my mouth. I'd bitten my tongue. My muscles ached and my head throbbed. Over the next few hours, reports started trickling in of others experiencing similar nightmares. Disrupted sleep cycles, strange illnesses, reports of unsettling events. Powell, usually a quiet, focused individual, was found huddled in the corner of the comms room babbling about giant spiders. He claimed they were crawling on the walls, their multiple legs clicking against the metal, their many eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. We restrained him, sedated him, but his screams echoed through the corridors. Dr. Joseph, his face drawn from fatigue and the unsettling medical examinations, finally confirmed our worst fears. "The data is conclusive," he stated. "We're seeing elevated heart rates, erratic neurological readings, and the reported hallucinations all point to the same thing. The subject's brain activity indicates they are experiencing their deepest fears, as if they were real. This rapid and aggressive manifestation of anxieties, there is a direct correlation with initial exposure to the alien artifact." He paused, his eyes scanning each of us in turn. "I believe the spores are the causal agent. They're altering our neural pathways somehow. The changes are rapid and, frankly, terrifying." He drew a hand through his short-cropped hair, a simple gesture belying mounting concern. The situation deteriorated rapidly. More and more crew members succumbed to the affliction. The nightmares intensified, becoming more frequent, more vivid, more real. And then, the hallucinations started to manifest physically. Powell's spiders, or at least a terrifying, distorted version of them, were the first. They weren't solid, not in the traditional sense. They were more like constructs of solidified fear, their bodies coming in and out of focus, made of a substance that absorbed the light. Their mobility was a series of sudden lurches and direction changes, as if they were navigating a reality that didn't quite align with our own. They skittered across the walls and ceilings, defying gravity with an unsettling ease. Their many-jointed legs, tipped with needle-sharp points, left scratches on the metal surfaces as they moved, a disturbing physical evidence of their presence. Panic began to set in. Robert, taking charge of the security detail, tried to maintain order, but it was a losing battle. His pulse rifle fire seemed to pass right through the creatures, only momentarily dispersing them before they reformed, their forms flickering like a bad transmission. Another security detail went down, his screams cut short as a creature, born from a nightmare of suffocation, enveloped them in a dense black cloud that overwhelmed the habitat's air filtration systems. We barricaded ourselves in the common area, a large open space that offered a clear line of sight in all directions. Dr. Wright, his initial excitement replaced by a haunted look, huddled in a corner, clutching his datapad, muttering about the ancient Martians and their mastery over the subconscious. Chris was catatonic, his eyes staring blankly ahead. Amidst the chaos, I found myself taking charge, not out of any desire for leadership, but out of sheer necessity. My past experiences, the horrors I had witnessed on Callisto, had hardened me, prepared me for this in a way. We need to find a way to stop this. Joseph, any progress on the spores? Joseph shook his head. They seem to be able to manipulate neural pathways, triggering specific areas of the brain responsible for fear, desire, memory. He paused, running a hand over his tired eyes. And they're evolving. The creatures they're creating are becoming more complex. Right, I said, turning to the xenolinguist. Anything in the tomb's data that can help us? Wright looked up. The tomb. It's a warning, he mumbled. A warning about the sleeper, the dreamweaver, the entity that controls the red dreams. He looked up at me then, a flash of lucidity in his eyes. The stasis chamber. It's a conduit. It's amplifying the entity's power, allowing it to project its influence into our reality. His words struck a chord. The stasis chamber. If it was amplifying the entity's power, could we shut it down? Could we sever the connection? Robert, I said, turning to the security chief, can we get back to the tomb? It won't be easy. The corridors are swarming with those things. We've rigged up modified mining lasers, cutting torches, and the emergency flare system to deliver concentrated bursts of intense light and heat. They seem to recoil from high temperatures and extreme light, at least momentarily. Plus, the mining lasers should be able to at least inflict some damage on solid matter. All right, I said. Here's the plan. We'll use the habitat's emergency airlocks to exit onto the surface. It's our best bet since the main airlocks are likely compromised. Wright and Chris will stay here and work on two things. First, overriding the security systems to give us access to the external airlock. And second, finding a way to remotely access the rover bay's systems. We'll need transport to reach the tomb quickly. Robert and I will use the laser cutters and flares to clear a path to the rovers. Joseph, you're with us. We need to reach the tomb, get inside and shut down that stasis chamber. We gathered what supplies we could, our movements swift and silent. Each of us knew the risks. Each of us had seen what these nightmares could do. We checked our gear one last time, a silent acknowledgement between us. It was time. We moved out of the relative safety of the common area and towards the emergency airlock. Emergency airlock override initiated. Chris's voice came over the comm system. You're good to go, Clay. Copy that, I replied, my focus fixed on the heavy, reinforced door of the emergency airlock. With a hiss, the airlock's inner door slid open, revealing a narrow, uninviting passage. The access tunnel normally used for maintenance, not emergency egress. It was our way out, our path to the tomb. Let's move. Stay close and watch each other's backs. We stepped into the tunnel, the airlock door hissing shut behind us, sealing us off from the relative safety of the habitat. The tunnel was cramped, barely large enough for two people to walk side by side. As we moved deeper into the tunnel, the sounds of the habitat, the screams, the crashes, the pulse rifle fire, faded. The silence was almost more terrifying than the noise, amplifying every creak of the tunnel. Suddenly, Robert, who was in the lead, stopped dead in his tracks. Hold up, I see something. He raised the laser cutter, its beam casting a red glow ahead. At the edge of the light, something moved. It wasn't one of the spider-like creatures that had haunted Powell. This was something larger, more amorphous. It resembled a shifting mass of flesh, a distorted imitation of a human form, its surface rippling and convulsing. It advanced slowly, its misshapen limbs dragging on the ground, leaving a trail of slime in its wake. It was a twisted, monstrous version of a human, but its features were melted and distorted, as if made of wax that had been left too close to a fire. It was the embodiment of one of the crew's deepest fears, a fear of being consumed, of losing oneself to the darkness. By all that is holy, Joseph breathed. Robert didn't hesitate. He engaged the modified laser cutter, its focusing lens now extending further, projecting a longer, concentrated beam of coherent light designed for precision cutting at a distance. The beam, A brilliant, searing line of energy sliced through the air and connected with the creature. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Where the beams struck, the creature's form seemed to boil and evaporate, its mass losing cohesion as the intense heat cauterized and vaporized its pseudo-flesh. It didn't scream or make any sound, but its entire body spasmed violently, a silent tremor that rippled through its form. Red dust, the remnants of its dissipated mass, rose from the point of contact. It began to shrink, its edges breaking down, but it wasn't destroyed. It was reforming, pulling itself back together, albeit smaller and slower, the red dust in the air seemingly drawn back into its form. I activated my own laser cutter, the high-pitched whine of the focusing mechanism filling the tunnel as the beam extended. Together we worked in tandem, our beams crisscrossing, creating a cage of searing energy around the creature. We aimed for the creature's extremities, slicing through its limbs, severing its connection to the walls and floor. The creature thrashed, its form flickering, its movements becoming increasingly erratic as it attempted to evade the cauterizing beams. Joseph, after a moment's hesitation, fumbled for a flare. He activated it, and the tunnel was instantly flooded with blinding white light. The creature recoiled, its form shrinking rapidly, the light and heat seeming to cause it intense pain. Taking advantage of its disorientation, we pressed our attack, slicing away larger and larger portions of its form, driving it back, forcing it to retreat into the darkness. It finally dissipated into a cloud of red dust, leaving behind only the faint shimmer of settling particles. We didn't stop to celebrate. We moved deeper into the tunnels until we reached the final airlock, the one that led to the surface. It took an agonizingly long time for Chris to override the security protocols. Finally, the outer door swung open, revealing the desolate, rust-colored landscape of Mars. The surface was bathed in the reddish light of the setting sun. The sky was a bruised purple, streaked with orange and red. We were outside, exposed, vulnerable, but we were one step closer to the tomb. "Rovers are operational," Chris reported over the comm. "Located in Bay 3. Get moving." The rovers' large, six-wheeled vehicles designed for rough terrain were parked inside, their solar panels gleaming in the fading light. We piled in, Robert taking the driver's seat. The landscape, once familiar, now seemed alien and menacing. The towering cliffs of the Valles Marineris rose, their geological strata contorted into organic shapes that challenged the natural processes of erosion. The wind, though thin, keened across the desolate plains, carrying with it the fine red dust that had become the very embodiment of our fear. It seemed to move with an unnatural sentience, swirling into fleeting, dust devil-like forms that mimicked the shapes of the creatures we had encountered. And every now and then, we would spot them in the distance, not as clearly defined entities, but as distortions in the landscape, ripples of unreality that moved against the wind, defying the natural flow of the Martian atmosphere. They seemed stronger now, more substantial, as if the boundary between their world and ours was thinning, emboldened by our leaving the habitat, by our venturing out into their increasingly expanding domain. We reached the tomb just as the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon. The interior of the tomb was even more unsettling than before. The carvings on the walls, no longer static, flowed and rearranged themselves like liquid metal, depicting scenes of a war fought not with weapons but with thoughts, with dreams. In the center, the stasis chamber stood, radiating a cool blue luminescence. The figure within, the alien sleeper, stood upright, its large black eyes fixed on us. It was awake, aware, and somehow expectant. As we approached the chamber, the distortions appeared, not as distinct creatures this time, but as localized warps in space-time. Sections of the chamber would stretch and compress, then snap back into place, like glitches in the fabric of reality. These distortions moved erratically, making it difficult to judge distance and direction. We moved on, our modified laser cutters held ready, their beams elongated and shimmering in the fluctuating light. Robert moved to my right, his cutter tracing patterns in the air, a defensive perimeter against the unpredictable distortions. Joseph stayed close, his medkit clutched in his hand, his eyes darting nervously around the chamber, alert for any sign of attack. We were not fighting creatures of flesh and blood, but manifestations of a reality unraveling, a reality being reshaped by the entity before us. Wright spoke. His voice, transmitted over the comm system, was filled with terror and understanding. "The chamber, it's not an amplifier," he said, his words interspersed with bursts of static. "It's a regulator, a filter. It's been keeping the entity's full power in check, translating its influence into terms our reality can comprehend." "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice strained, as I narrowly avoided a spatial distortion that briefly turned the floor into a vertical wall. The environment was becoming more and more disjointed, harder to navigate. "It means we can't just shut it down," Wright replied. "We need to recalibrate it, adjust its output, not sever the connection. The entity is too powerful. It would merge with our reality completely. The stasis chamber is the only thing that can contain it. I'm sending you the sequence now, but be careful. One wrong input and—" His voice was abruptly cut off, replaced by a burst of static. The new sequence appeared on my heads-up display, a series of even more complex and fluid symbols than the last. This was not about brute force, but about finesse, about understanding the subtle interplay of forces at work. The entity, now fully revealed, did not attack. It simply observed us, its black eyes vast and unfathomable, seeming to look not at us, but through us, into the very core of our being. I moved towards the control panel. Each symbol on the panel resonated with a specific frequency, a specific thought pattern. This was not just a machine. It was an interface designed to interact with consciousness itself. It was a conversation, a negotiation between two realities. I began to input the sequence, each symbol requiring not just a physical action, but a specific mental state, a focused intention. I had to visualize the desired outcome, to hold in my mind the image of a stable reality, a reality where the entity's influence was contained, filtered, translated into a form that wouldn't rip our world apart. It was like trying to assemble a complex puzzle while simultaneously experiencing a fever dream. My mind bending to interact with this higher level of reality while also fighting for purchase on my own. As the final symbol was entered, the blue light emanating from the stasis chamber intensified, then slowly began to shift, cycling through the spectrum until it settled on a soft green. The distortion ceased. The shifting colors within the tomb stabilized, and the carvings on the walls resolved themselves into a static, albeit still alien, script. As we watched, the green light emanating from the stasis chamber intensified, then slowly began to retract, to condense around the entity. The sleeper's form became less defined. The amber-hued fluid, absent since the entity's awakening, began to reappear, rising slowly from the base of the chamber. The fluid rose steadily, surrounding the entity. The sleeper made no movements and allowed the fluid to envelop it. Its eyes finally closed, and with a final dimming of the green light, the chamber returned to its original state. The sleeper was once again dormant, encased in its protective shell, sealed away from our reality in the exact same position as we found it. We had not defeated it, not in the traditional sense. We had simply found a way to restore the balance, to return the entity to its intended state of suspended animation. A state, we hoped, that would last indefinitely. We left the tomb, leaving the sleeper to its silent slumber, its existence a reminder of the vast, unexplored depths of the cosmos and the limits of human understanding. The landscape was bathed in the dim, blue-tinged glow of the Martian night. Phobos, the larger of Mars' two moons, hung high in the sky, casting a faint ethereal light on the desolate plains. The universe we now knew was stranger and more complex than we could ever have imagined, and our place within it more precarious. And somewhere, in the back of my mind, I knew this was not an ending, but a beginning. a prelude to a new chapter in humanity's long, strange journey into the unknown. The red dust had settled for now, but the universe held its breath, waiting to see what we would do next.